Hey folks, Joe Valley here. Welcome to another episode of the Quiet Light podcast. Today's podcast is sponsored by my Amazon guy. I know the founder, Stephen Pope. He's a good guy. I know him personally. He's been on our podcast and we've been on his. And you've probably seen him all over YouTube sharing free educational content. If you own an Amazon business, you got to check out the content. He's going to help you level up your PPC, your SEO, your design. They can even manage your entire Amazon catalog. Check him out at myamazon.com. That's myamazonguy.com. And now on to our guest today. Our guest today is an entrepreneur, an accidental entrepreneur, and somebody I like to call an exitpreneur because he is a Quiet Light client. Pat Yates was his advisor here on the team and just closed the transaction on September 1st, I think was the day that the transaction closed. Listed the business in July and ended up getting it closed on September 1st. It's an accidental entrepreneurship type of situation because he is a programmer and had a problem with what he was doing within his church at one point and developed some software to solve that problem. Ended up with thousands of free users and decided to level it up and start charging for people to get extra support and service, and did that very, very successfully. He ultimately ran the business for a total of 15 years and was getting older. He's 65 years old and decided to move on to his next adventure in life and get the business sold. Great interview covering all sorts of topics and some advice for some younger entrepreneurs at the end of the podcast as well. Please listen in. This is Dan Cooperstock, an exitpreneur and client of Quiet Light. Here we go. Hey, Dan, welcome to the Quiet Light podcast.
Thank you very much, Joe. Glad to be here.
It's good to have you here. Well, can you give the folks a little bit of background on yourself? What kind of business you started? I know that you just had an exit with Pat helping you get the business sold, but give the audience a little bit of background on yourself, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, sure. I mean, for a long time, I was a programmer, and I'm also a Quaker. And for my Quaker meeting, which is, like a church, for those who aren't familiar, we had bought some software to use in the church, and I started seeing the deficiencies of it. And so I ended up writing something that did the same things, but more properly. I could see that the thing we'd bought before was not designed by a professional programmer. And then eventually that turned into a program that I started giving away for free for years. And then eventually I went professional with that, made it a business, and ended up with two different programs for churches and charities. And that's been my business since 2007.
Since 2007. So that is a very long time, 15 years. I'm going to cut to the punchline for the folks listening. Dan just sold this business through Quiet Light. Some stats and details. It looks like you signed an engagement letter with Pat here on the team, June 2nd. You had your only letter of intent. You had 10 calls with potential buyers. You had 5 offers and you accepted one of them. And that was accepted on July 15th. So pretty quick turnaround. And then 45 days later, you sold the business for about 12.5% higher than the original list price. So congratulations on all of that. Now let's go back to the beginning. You gave it away for years. First, you found a need, you solved a problem. Mm-hmm. First, it was your own and your church's. Mm-hmm. And then you gave it away for free. How did you transition from giving it away for free to testing out, charging the churches?
I'd been doing that I'd been giving it away for about 8 years since I developed a Windows version. That very first version was way back in the DOS days, and I had over 4,000 users at that time. And so basically I said to those users, there were slightly complicated reasons why I decided to do this, because I hadn't really been intending to ever make a business of it. It just sort of happened. But for various reasons, I decided to do it. And basically I said to those users, look, obviously you can keep what you're using now for free. But if you want to be eligible for support and upgrades from now on, you can pay this much. And a lot of them did very, very quickly. So I could see that it was going to work. I was prepared to go back to work. I would be working for employers all this time. I was prepared to go back to work if it didn't work, but it did. And so it, grew fairly quickly. And after, you know, it was about it was about 7 years before I hired my first employee. So all that time I was just a solo entrepreneur doing everything by myself, with just very occasional bits of contract work. And then by the time we did the transition, the sale, we were up to 3 employees. I just sort of gradually added people as the income would make it sensible.
Now, when you had 4,000 original free subscribers and you said, keep it for free, or if you want the upgrades, you can pay this monthly fee. Ballpark, what percentage said, yeah, I'd love to send you money every month?
Sorry, apologies. I'd have to go back to my records, but a lot paid very quickly. People have always said to us, we love the software, and that continued from way back then through to today.
And while you were giving it away for free, did you have a full-time job?
Yeah, I had a full-time job.
At what point did you quit the full-time job and just focus on this software?
Well, what actually happened was I took a leave of absence. And my thought was that I was going to rewrite the software, which was written in some proprietary programming language, to be more something that could be open sourced. And part of that was thinking, well, what if something happens to me? What if I get run over by a bus? If at least it's open source software, maybe somebody can take it over and keep supporting the users. And so I worked on that actually for a couple of months. And then two things happened. One is I got to the point where I realized, gee, this programming languages I'm using to do this are really much worse than what I'd been using before. And my boss from my work started saying, we need you back. And so I said, well, I'm really having fun working on this. How can I keep having fun? And the way was, let's start selling it using the old code base, the same proprietary languages, which we've kept through to this day. And it didn't actually solve the problem of what if I get run over by a bus, though eventually adding some staff did. And certainly now selling to some purchasers who have every intention of keeping it going for the long term, that really, really solves it.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things I would have said to you as an advisor is, as you plan in the next 2-3 years when you're going to exit, if there's a platform out there that's not proprietary, that is open source, that you can put this on and do an equal job, it makes it a much more transferable business, right? And that's kind of what you were thinking about, right? If we get hit by a bus, what am I leaving behind? Mm-hmm. A mess that nobody can figure out, or something that somebody that's good at coding can take care of. The way that you solved it was actually with people. And so in the transaction that just closed, did the staff of 3 transfer with the business, or did the buyer not need them?
2 of them did, and I'm also contracted to keep working for them largely on the existing software, but also various other tasks that will be slowly phased out as they can take them over for the next year.
Yeah, and I want to touch on that because it's an interesting deal structure that you put together. But before we go there, let me ask, when it came to the 5 offers that you got, what was the process like? I know, and people that are listening know that, as advisors at Quiet Light, we put you, the sellers, kind of through the ringer in the process of getting your business ready to be listed for sale. And I think in our initial call, I think Pat came up with like 130 questions that you answered. And you were rightly complaining to me that you were working harder on that than actually running the business, because I told my wife that same thing back in 2010 when I sold.
I won't say I was complaining. I was observing it, but
We were discussing it.
I
We
understood why they were asking all these questions,
that's
because it
true.
gives a lot of information to potential purchasers. That together with, all the financial disclosure, which was a whole nother thing, not included in those 130 odd questions.
And those 130 odd questions, you're right, you're not complaining. What it does is it streamlines the process for the buyers once they get the package, which is critical, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually easier for you during those 10 buyer seller conference calls that resulted in, I'm actually looking at the stats, it was actually 6 offers, not 5. And then that one acceptable offer at the end. If you only had 10, 15, 20 questions, some basic stuff, buyers wouldn't have, come up with enough questions. They probably wouldn't have jumped on 10 buyer seller conference calls.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't have resulted in the same thing. And going from listing to closing in such a short period of time, I want to say it was 10 to 12 days, it looks like here, pretty quick. Not listing to closing, but listing to LOI.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let's talk about those buyer seller conference calls. It looks like you had 10 of them, 6 offers, 1 accepted.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you accept the one that you accepted?
They were just clearly the best.
What makes them the best?
Were,
Let's define that. Were they
yeah,
likable? Were they bringing the most money?
I liked them, and they were experienced tech entrepreneurs who'd been through acquisitions and exits before, so understood the process, and that gave me a confidence that they were going to know what they were doing and know what to do with a software business. Most of the other people just didn't have the right experience, um, or maybe almost enough, but we're all going to be lacking something. Of my purchasers, one of them is sort of more a money and a business guy, and one of them is a more a tech product leader type guy. So between them, that's a great combination. And yeah, sort of. So with everybody that made an offer, except maybe there was one offer that just didn't seem good enough to follow up. We had a second interview. And with these guys and maybe one other, I had a third interview, so that we could each ask some more questions. Because obviously I wanted to make sure that my business was going to the right people. That was really important to me. And yeah, so that's sort of, yeah.
That last comment, that's surprisingly more important. And I'm talking to all of you buyers out there. It's surprisingly more important to entrepreneurs like Dan and myself than you would expect.
Mm-hmm.
It matters. At the end of the day, when it's all said and done, when I sold my last business, I moved on pretty quickly because I got paid all cash, and it was a good situation, good deal for me. And I had a new baby, right? It was the money to manage. And a lot of people look at it that way. But at the same time, it's important to people that build these businesses and employ people that are providing for their family, that it's a secure transaction and it transfers over. I've sold a business a few years ago, probably 5 or 6 years ago now, Dan, where I had 2 full price offers in the mid 7-figure range. And one was all cash, and one was an SBA deal that required a 10% seller note. And my seller, very savvy, he simply liked the guy that had to give a 10% seller note more than the other. He trusted him more, felt better about him. And that particular buyer honed in on wanting to take care of the business and keep the people and transfer them over and really just keep that entity that this Syed built. And that did it for Syed. And I can understand how it did it for you as well.
So just if I could just comment on one more thing, like you mentioned, having a baby. This business is my baby. And I've always cared deeply about the customers and about the market that I'm serving of nonprofits. And so that's why I want to make sure that, not just the staff, but the customers will be well taken care of.
Right,
Yeah.
because they actually use the product that you've created.
Yeah.
So, Dan, obvious question, simple question. If it's your baby, if you loved it so much, why did you sell it?
I was just getting tired of some aspects of that. I was doing customer support at many hours of many days of the week. Even though I had one full-time support person, I was still doing a lot of supervision. And while they were doing it full time, I would, look at emails and answer them first thing when I got up in the morning, and I would look at them multiple times in the evening and answer them. And on weekend and on Christmas Day, there would be emails that I would answer. And I was getting tired of feeling responsible for thousands of users. And, I'm 65 and I have a few health issues, none of them, looking like they're likely to be fatal, although life is fatal for all of us eventually. Um, and so it was just kind of time to slow down and have someone else shoulder the responsibility.
It makes total sense. So,
Yeah.
everybody's going to exit their business someday, and
Somehow.
somehow, you and I are within a decade of each other, age-wise, and those that are 20 or 30 years younger than us don't see this vision as clearly. You do get tired. You do want to move on sometimes to your next adventure that may be another business that you launch that you do with so much more intelligence and wisdom and
Mm.
experience and money than you did the first time. And sometimes you just want to kick back and take it easy
Mhm.
and unburden yourself. And that's the key thing. Sometimes your business becomes a burden and you want to unburden yourself of that. And sometimes the burden is managing cash flow so you can buy enough inventory. In your case, it's making sure the customers are taken care of no matter what time of day or what day of the year it
Mhm.
is.
Mhm.
When you might just want to go disappear for 5 days, do you trust your full-time staff
Yeah.
to do that
And
job?
I mean, truthfully, the new owners very sensibly are limiting the support hours to reasonable support hours, not crazy support hours like I was doing first thing in the morning, last thing at night before I went to bed. And that's good. I'm happy with that. I'm at the very first when we implemented that, I was struggling a little not to go to the computer, but now I'm happy with it. It's fair, it's reasonable for our software is actually priced quite inexpensively, so it's very reasonable for the inexpensive prices of our products not to have massive hours outside of 9 to 5 ish. So yeah.
That makes sense. And sometimes only a new owner can come in with a logical vision, whereas yours is a passionate one and you're going
Mhm.
to do whatever you can
Mhm.
because that's what you've always done. So it's
Mhm.
hard sometimes. So tell me about the process of going through due diligence, right? You've signed this letter of intent, you've agreed on a price, on terms. Let's talk about the due diligence process. It sometimes is
Oh
very
yeah.
invasive. What was it like for you?
It was a lot of work too. There've been a whole bunch of things that have been, ever since starting this process, probably all pretty much nonstop. I've been a lot busier than I'd been in the say prior months because, with staff, although I worked those extra hours doing support and stuff, I still was not busy all the time. You know, I would often watch TV during the day or something like that, go out. Um, so I've been a lot busier. So the due diligence specifically, yeah, there were a lot of questions, and some of them were hard to answer, and some of that was because of how we had organized our customer database that they wanted information that just sort of wasn't there. Stuff about, churn, what's your retention rate and stuff. Because of some of how we had set our pricing and policies and how we recorded the data, all of that was actually very hard to determine. And so we had to kind of have a lot of conversations about, well, what are these numbers? What do they mean? How can they be made more realistic? And then we just had a bunch of, we had a number of talks about where they wanted to go and what ideas I had. with the business. And yeah, it was a lot of work, but it worked out. Yeah.
Obviously. So, so sometimes, with an e-commerce business, a content business, sometimes the most important numbers are right there in the P&L. It's a profit and loss statement. You get cost of goods sold, you've got expenses, you've got the bottom line profit. With a SaaS business, those buyers are not looking at the P&L first. One of the things they'll focus on first is what you just said, churn rate. What's the churn rate?
Right.
And then, what's the lifetime value of a customer?
Mm-hmm.
Because their
Mm-hmm.
job, what they want to do is they don't want to just, this is not an ATM machine where they're going to just take out money on a regular basis. They want to grow this thing.
Yeah.
Right? I'm
Yeah.
assuming that's the
And
case here.
yeah. And I mean, the technical complications for us of evaluating that were A, payments were annual rather than monthly. And B, payments, although I'd actually started moving away from this before I even started the process. So we were in the process of moving away from a setup where payments were kind of optional. If you wanted support and upgrades to the software, you paid, or you could pay just viewing that as insurance, even if you weren't sure you needed those things. But if you didn't feel like spending a lot of money and didn't think you needed support and upgrades, you didn't pay. And so it's not a standard analysis situation, because those people that didn't pay could well be going to pay again in the future. It's not like they'd necessarily left or stopped using the software. They just hadn't paid recently, perhaps. So that greatly, that made it, and it made it difficult for the purchasers to say, well, what are we actually getting here?
Right.
Yeah.
In hindsight, do you wish at some point in the last 24 to 36 months you had changed it to pay only subscriptions, or that there's two different levels of pay? No service, it's $4 a month. It's full
Yeah,
service,
I mean,
something different.
I mean, like I said, I was already moving in that direction, and I actually hadn't. It's not like I was moving in that direction and then I said, okay, well, a couple of months into this process that's going to take over a year to move in that direction, I'm going to start trying to sell the business. The trying to sell the business is something I'd given some thought to in the previous year, but I'd never, hired a broker, and I'd never pursued it hard enough. And then I hit a medical difficulty that was really concerning me, and which fortunately has been largely resolved. And that just pushed me enough to say, okay, I really got to do something to be able to see an end to this, in case it gets to a point where it's a real problem. And so it was just kind of bad timing that it worked out that way. Yeah.
Right. And you were ready to move on at that point. And so, curious on a couple of things. First, you talked about annual subscriptions instead
Mm-hmm.
of monthly.
Mm-hmm.
In hindsight, do you feel as though you would have had a better grasp on the business, or it would have been an easier transition for a buyer if historically you'd done monthly subscriptions instead of annual?
Well, like I said, our prices are quite inexpensive. So annual still makes some sense, I think, but um, but forced payments in some way or another would have, yes, historically would have been more sensible. But it was also just part of my philosophy that, I mean, I think I was very aware that in many ways I was running, what's often called a lifestyle business. I got a nice life out of it. I felt like I was doing a service, and, I was providing some employment, providing very good software for a very affordable price. And I didn't care that much about making more money or growing the business. It just grew, which allowed me to hire more staff, but it didn't grow because I was making enormous efforts to grow it. In fact, I was always horrible at marketing. And so in some ways, I guess I was kind of lucky that it grew as much as it did, given how horrible I was at marketing. But obviously, in many ways, it sold itself, which was great.
Well, you built a great product and you took care of the customers that used it. So that's the first two steps.
Mm-hmm.
So they're spreading the word for you. Let's talk about the deal structure a little bit, because you chose a deal structure that is the exception rather than the rule, right? In most of the transactions that we work with, there's going to be, 80% cash. Sometimes it's going to be all cash, but very, very rarely is there an employment contract. And in this case, you agree to accept part of the purchase price as an employment contract. Talk to me about the logic behind that.
You know, that's not actually how I viewed the transaction. I mean, the way it was structured was a certain amount of cash and then another certain amount paid out over the next year. And in addition, I was contracted to work for them for decreasing amounts over the next year. But it's not like those two pieces about the next year were necessarily had to be viewed as being tied together.
So you could have said no to working for them at a decreasing amount over the 12 months after closing.
No, I don't know that they would have accepted that
Yeah.
deal.
And is that
And
because of the proprietary software, you think, or because of something else?
um, yeah, I think, they were aware that I still knew the absolute most about the software in the business, despite having three employees, and that without me, it would be very difficult, without being able to, slowly, pick my brain and stuff. It'd be much more difficult to continue the business successfully. And so I guess I'm not saying that they would have agreed to a deal without both of those things. I'm just saying I didn't necessarily link them in my head. Like when I'm getting these monthly payments from the amount that's paid out over the next year, I'm not necessarily thinking to myself, oh, this is my salary for the last month I worked. Because it isn't a salary. I'm not an employee. It's just part of the contract I signed with them that I will, continue to help them with the work in decreasing amounts over the next year.
And what is that like for you as the former owner of the business that made every decision, was responsible for every aspect of it,
Mhm, mhm.
to where you are now, which is you're 45 days out roughly from when the transaction closed.
Mhm.
How do you feel responsibility wise?
Um, I feel less responsible, certainly. Um, I think it's inevitable that anybody in this situation is going to have some, some bits of conflict because we don't have exactly the same concepts of how to run a software company, et cetera. And especially given what I said, that in many ways I was doing it as an amateur, and it's more like they're professionals at running a software business. Um, so so that's not surprising, but you know, overall, I completely understand the decisions they're making, and and it's their baby. I've said to them many times, when well, I might not have done that, but it's your choice, it's your call, and
Do
that's
you
that's
do,
fine. I'm happy that's their call.
do you feel unburdened at all with some of the daily responsibilities that are no longer
Yeah,
on your plate?
especially the support. I mean, I've sort of taken on some responsibilities because I saw that it would be helpful. And they certainly want me to be very much part of, design decisions for the development that's going on. And I'm happy about that. Which doesn't mean that every idea of mine is going to be accepted or whatever. Um, but um,
You feel good about the
I got
decision.
lost.
You feel good about the relationship
Yeah,
and
yeah,
the
overall,
choices you made.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And now you've got more money in the bank, and there's a light at the end of the tunnel to do whatever you
Mm-hmm.
want to do. And
Mm-hmm.
do you think there's a sliver of a chance that you may say, you know what, guys, I'm enjoying this. I appreciate you wanting to keep me on a little bit. Let's just, cut the hours to X amount. Do you think you would consult with them or work with them on a longer term basis than just over the
Yeah,
next 12
yeah,
months?
that's possible. I've mentioned it to them, and we've all said, yeah, that's something that we could consider, depending on. many factors.
Yeah. It's 10 and a half months from now. Tell me about the toughest part of going through what you've gone through, which is listing your business and selling it. What's been the toughest part? Just listening to Pat. I know he talks a lot. Yes, Pat, I'm making fun of you.
No, not at all. I'll tell you, I mean, this is just a funny thing that was just annoying, was one of the first interviews we had with interested purchasers. It was so obvious that that person had not read the package or barely skimmed the package. They were asking all these questions that were answered clearly in the package. And both Pat and I were really kind of pissed off about that.
Yeah.
But that's not what you asked.
What's what stands out. So that's interesting.
Yeah. I don't know that there's one tough part. I mean, the fact that I wasn't able to really have answers to all of the questions was, I guess it was a problem for the process in a sense. But it wasn't anything I could exactly do anything about. I mean, I could come up with sort of various approaches for best estimates to things like churn and retention, but that's all they were. That's all they could be, as best estimates, because of those factors that I mentioned to you earlier.
Right.
So that was difficult, and because of the way our customer data was organized, actually coming up with database queries that would give these answers they were really complicated database queries.
Yeah, it's a challenge when you're running it as a lifestyle business and people are looking for data, and that's stuff that you just didn't have to pay attention to. It can be a challenge. What was the best part? You've gone through it. You're 45 days out from the closed transaction. Looking back, anything stand out? Other than doing it in general?
Yeah. Don't know. You're asking questions I haven't thought about. So, I mean, I really like the guys, notwithstanding the odd disagreement. I think they're really nice guys. I think they're really well intentioned. I think they're very knowledgeable. So I'm very happy about that. It's interesting to be working on some new directions. And like I think I said at the very beginning of this, I'm a programmer. Everything else is incidental, and I'm actually getting to do more programming, and I really like that. I just finished a big redesign of our customer relationship database kind of thing. That was a very big job that I did very quickly, and I know I'm the only person that could have done that because I knew it the best.
Interesting. You get to get back to what you love.
Yeah, and that's sort of just in time for another tech support person being added next week. So like we went live on that this week. So that's kind of exciting.
Excellent. You've gone through this process. You've built a business, lifestyle business, sold it, and now you're on the other side of it. If you're, sitting across the table from some younger entrepreneurs that are just starting off, is there any particular advice that you'd give them?
I don't know. I mean, I've talked to people that want to be entrepreneurs a couple of times. I've tried being a mentor, sort of on a somewhat official basis, and I don't know. I think I ended up doing something that was very different from what a lot of people trying to be entrepreneurs try to do. I was, solving my own problems, basically, is how it all started.
You're an accidental entrepreneur then.
Accidental entrepreneur. I was working in an area that I cared about. And I think that's a piece of advice I would give. Don't just pick anything that you think can sell. If it's something that you care about, that's going to really help. And
I think those are great words of wisdom, because you and I have been through enough things as entrepreneurs that we've seen some tough times, right? You started this back in 2007. We've seen some tough times. And I think that when times do get tough, either personally or professionally, loving the service or products or service that you provide is really, really important, right? If you're a ex-NFL football player, but you're selling, ballet shoes, it's not going to be as passionate, right? But if you're selling football equipment, it's what you love. So I couldn't agree more. So that's the advice. Find something that you are passionate about, and then focus on that. Great advice. Great advice. Well, listen, Dan, I'm real excited that we were able to work with you, helping you through this transaction. Pat is a fantastic guy, great entrepreneur. As you probably know, he's been on Shark Tank, has a deal with Robert now for his.
No, I didn't know that. That's cool.
You didn't know that?
No.
Oh, never
came up.
You've got to Google that.
Okay.
Pat Yates, it's buyhappyfeet.com is his website.
Okay.
And Shark Tank. Put it all in there.
Okay.
Robert actually said, no, I'm out, and then came back in because of Pat and his passion and his personality.
Yeah, no, I can see that. He was enormously helpful, and the whole process was enormously helpful. I can't imagine how I could have done this successfully on my own. I actually had explorations with one pair of guys and one other guy about buying it, like last year. And it just kind of dragged on, and it never got anywhere, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so just going through this process where, you guys have an enormous mailing list of possible interested purchasers, and because of, like you said, the big package you put together with so much information, it just makes it all work.
It all works, and it got you the value that you wanted, and in a situation that you've been yearning for. Now you get to do some stuff that you love, which is programming again, and decide, what your next adventure will be.
Which I do not know.
I don't either, tell you the truth.
Yeah.
None of us really do. I look forward to learning about it in a follow-up recording when we have you back on the podcast, maybe another year or so, and see what it's like looking back 12 months after an exit.
That'd be interesting, sure.
Excellent. Well, Dan, congratulations on your exit, and thanks again for joining me on the Quiet Light podcast. Greatly
Thank you very
appreciate
much.
it.
It's been a pleasure.